Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edifying episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Guys, welcome back to The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. This is going to be an edifying episode. I like that word.
That it is.
I like that word.
Yes.
That's a good word. You haven't used that one before.
No, I haven't.
People don't know, right? Literally seconds before the cameras went live, Blake was saying, have I used this word before? Have I used this word before?
I don't remember, so.
Professional shows would write this stuff down.
Well, we've done so many shows, you know.
Of course, we don't write anything down,
No,
but professionals would. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter is at Alan and Mosley, but you don't have to do any of that because you just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com. As well as you can support the show there through the donation link or on Patreon, which is also patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley. So really, you should just go to every website you know, type in /TGS Alan Mosley, see what comes up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I'm there.
Yeah, you are there.
I'm on at least 3 of them out of billions.
That's
but,
right,
you know,
yeah.
And most of them have like naked people on them. But for the ones that have libertarianism on them, and you type /TGS Alan Mosley, there might be.
I'm glad you're not in the naked ones.
Yeah, I know. I'm not in the naked ones. So we actually have to keep the intro kind of short today because we have a really long interview spot. But it's totally worth it because we have the legendary Lew Rockwell, founder and chairman of the Mises Institute, on the program today.
So exciting.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm a little nervous.
You're nervous? You should be nervous.
I don't get shook that easy. But I'm a little nervous just because people, especially younger folks, people who are newer to that line of thinking, maybe people who don't know a lot about Mises, they don't realize what an incredible benefactor Lew Rockwell has been to the community. Untold amounts of works made available for free. I mean, just so many resources at people's fingertips. There's really no excuse for people to have not delved into some of the great works because they're right there. Yeah. You can't miss this stuff up. No. I say that all the time. Yeah. Obviously, you can because like 99% of people do, but you can't miss this stuff up. But before we kill the intro, we got to do a meme of the week really quick.
We got to do a meme of the week.
And full disclosure, we didn't pick the spiciest of memes out of respect to Lew being on the program today. But this was actually sent to us by our friend from the Anarcho-Christian podcast, Stephen Rose.
Here we go.
He actually tagged me on Twitter and on Facebook with this meme. Obviously it made him think about me. Oh. It says, of course, it's a prequel meme.
Yes.
Star Wars prequel meme. I failed you, Anakin. I have failed you. Anakin says, I should have known you would think a hot dog is a sandwich. Anakin, it's meat between bread. From my point of view, it belongs in its own separate category. Well, then you are lost. Oh. A hot dog is a sandwich. We might get into that later.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that.
How could, believe it or not, a friend of mine actually messaged me and said, I don't know if I would ask Lew that question because it's just, it's just silly and there's so many great things you guys could talk about. Why waste time with that? I say no, sir.
No, sir.
How would it be the gold standard if the guest can come and go and not have to answer the question that truly plagues our greatest thinkers?
Yes, that's true.
So we'll get around to it.
That's right.
I'll figure out a way to get it in. But we're going to have to cut this short because we have to have every minute possible for this interview. It's going to be worth it. We will be right back after the break with Lew Rockwell. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com. Hey, did you see the playoff games last weekend?
Oh, you're into the sports ball game.
Sports Ball with Mike Meharry and Alan Mosley. SportsBallPodcast.com.
Sports ball is not a libertarian sports show. It's a sports show done by a couple of libertarians.
For when you need your bread and circuses.
Guys, welcome back to The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. We are here with our guest for today, which doesn't need very much of an introduction. We are very happy to have him on the show. He is the founder and chairman of the Mises Institute, and you can find their website at mises.org. We are here with Lew Rockwell. Lew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Alan. Great to be on your show.
Well, you know, we had discussed topics to talk about today before you came on, and I'll tell you what, I'm regretting it a little bit. When last night I was doing my notes for the show, and I had said, we're going to talk about some of the emerging candidates for 2020, and yet again, it's another election cycle where there's more candidates than I have fingers, so I'm already lost.
Yeah, it's very funny. I hope there are maybe 35 Democrats. I'd like to see them have to have a gigantic stage to put them all on.
Now, before we get into the specifics of some of the highlights of the individual candidates, is this more a recent phenomenon, or has there been more election cycles in the past that I'm just too young and naive to remember, where you have these wide stages with 8, 10, 12, 15, 16 podiums? I mean, it just seems so weird for the average voter to even look at.
Well, I think that there have been maybe not this many candidates ever, but there have been significantly more candidates than were ever allowed on the stage. Mm-hmm. So they would just typically pick the 2 or 3 top people and maybe leave out 3 or 4 others. So this time, I guess they're going to have everybody. And I'm all for it. As I say, I think it's going to be hilarious. Hilarious and evil, of course.
Oh, yeah. They're definitely going to give us plenty of sound bites to talk about. So I guess we'll start with the Republican side really quick, because it's going to be a much shorter part of the conversation. I'll throw you the quick softball. Is there going to be anyone of note or relevance that's actually going to attempt to primary Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's very possible that Romney is going to try to do that.
Okay.
He certainly is hostile to Trump, and not in a good sense. There are plenty of things to be upset with Trump about, but of course Romney is upset with him for the few decent things he's done, and so I think that's possible. Also, Kasich, I guess he's now the former governor of Ohio, some chance he's going to do it, but I don't think either one of these guys have a chance. And Trump will easily be the nominee.
Now, you mentioned John Kasich, and I saw him in my notes as well. He hasn't declared that he's going to run, but he's still on the maybe list according to New York Times. It seems odd to me that a Kasich would still be hanging around, because this isn't his first rodeo, and I mean, has he ever had any traction anywhere?
Well, I guess he did in Ohio when he ran for governor. But no, not otherwise. And of course, these people, once they get bitten by the bug, they feel that really they ought to be the ones to be nominated and to be elected, and they just can't believe that they didn't happen to them. And so I guess he, and also of course Romney, was the nominee, a very unfortunate occurrence before, and I think that he wants to do it again. Yeah. There's all kinds of rumors that, I think reliable rumors that that's his plan.
Now, I could definitely see Romney at least being a semi-legitimate contender if we even want to go that far. But again, it seems to me, and in historical precedent, I think tends to lean towards this, that it's very seldom that you see politicos enter and exit the mainstream back and forth 2 or 3 times and then find success way down the road. I mean, surely there's Republican strategists that are talking to these guys and telling them your best opportunities are behind you.
Well, the neocons all love Romney. And they're pushing him to run, and they're promising him all kinds of money and support if he does so. So will that bring stars to his eyes and get him to do it? I think he has, no chance whatsoever. But I'd be glad. I just think it'd be more fun if he were in the contest, even though I can't stand him.
Well, I'm definitely in the same boat with you there. But before we move on to the Democrats, I just want to get a quick explanation from you. So why specifically does Mitt Romney have no chance against Donald Trump?
Well, I think because of his positions. I mean, he's much to the left of Trump, and he did badly the last time. I just think he has no chance. Just because he's unpleasant, and he's a neocon, so he wants war with Russia and all the various things the Democrats want. So it's I must say, I don't think he has a chance. I certainly hope he doesn't have a chance. And in fact, you know, people joke about the fact that Bill Kristol is always wrong. And Kristol likes Romney, so maybe that's by itself an indication that Romney has no chance.
Well, you've said Bill Kristol on the program, so we already have to delete this whole interview and start over. Well, I'll ask you one more follow-up on the Republican side of things before we move on. I think one of the biggest criticisms of Trump, at least from our end, because the NCAP side, typically we have no dog in the fight, it's that Trump talked such a good game during the elections of distancing himself from the neocon war state, but yet it seems like the swamp caught up to him, and he appointed so many, you know, you're thinking of Pompeo's, you're thinking of John Bolton's, have now meandered their way into the Trump White House. So you're telling me then
Elliott Abrams.
Yeah, Abrams. Is that but the neocons are not happy with that amount of influence. They would still rather see Trump go.
No, they still hate him, and of course these are people who are in effect subversives within his administration. Why he appointed them, will we ever know? For example, Elliott Abrams wrote a very nasty article about Trump after he was nominated, and Trump said this guy would never get a job in my administration. Then of course he appoints him as the special envoy to destroy Venezuela, which Abrams is very happy to try to do, but it's another indication of Trump betraying his base and betraying the promises that he made when he was running. Yeah. And then we have to look at the budget that just came out yesterday, $4.7 trillion, by far the biggest budget ever, and of course more money for the military, and I must say he hasn't. I remember Ron Paul being asked, what did he like? Was there anything after an interview, anything he liked about Obama? And he said, well, he hasn't bombed Iran yet. So. We can say the same thing about Trump. Mm-hmm. He hasn't bombed Iran yet, although it sure looks like he would like nothing better than to go to war against Iran. Mm-hmm. And of course, he would like to overthrow the government of Venezuela as well and cause another Libya. I don't know. Certainly, a tremendous amount of destruction and death, and because Maduro is not obeying him. So it's and of course we had. Pompeo said, and Elliott Abrams saying that we're going to have to bring back the Monroe Doctrine. And my guess is nobody's read the Monroe Doctrine. If you read the Monroe Doctrine, it's an interesting document. But Monroe in there says that we're going to promise, if we're telling the European powers, you're going to stay out of this hemisphere. This hemisphere is in our control. A very imperialist and unfortunate comment, of course. But he said in return, we'll stay out of your hemisphere. We won't bother anybody in Europe. We won't do anything in that hemisphere. So somehow that part of the Monroe Doctrine dropped out immediately. And again, nobody knows that. But again, it's an interesting thing to read. All these things are interesting. I remember some time ago when reading the treaty that established the U.S. base at Guantanamo. And of course, the U.S. has been holding that to torture people. And the U.S. promised in its treaty with Cuba, imposed on Cuba, I might add, that it would have this gigantic base, but it would only be used as a coaling station for naval ships. That is, to refuel U.S. Navy ships and for no other purpose. Not to, for example, torture people and have prisoners there. So again, the U.S. Doesn't keep its word, as I guess almost everybody who's ever had a treaty with the U.S. knows full well.
Well, I was reminded as you were speaking just now. I forget. I don't know how many laws we're up to now, but it's the Tom Woods law of no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain. I'm sure you've heard that one before. But
yeah, a horrible, truthful comment. Yes,
it's so disappointing because I mean, even as recently as maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks ago, we were staring down at least comments from the president that potentially there was going to be a withdrawal from Syria, which absolutely is long overdue, just like with everywhere. And yet it seems like we've already walked back on that, and now Trump is saying that, well, we're going to have to leave a presence there and that sort of thing. And
same with Afghanistan, of course.
Yeah, of course. And so again, I guess I'm left with this hopeless cynicism of even when a candidate does come along that says the right words, even when they intimate in office that they might make that type of move, the neocons still get their way. And it just and if anything, it's really a window into the lust for power that neocons have, that they have that much influence over a sitting president that at least on the surface seems antagonistic towards them, and yet that's still, they're getting everything they want, but that's still not enough.
There's a young comedian, I'm sorry to say I don't remember his name, Bill, I'll think of his last name, but he had a part of his act where he would talk about when a new president is newly elected, they take him into into a room at the White House, and there are all the heads of all the Praetorian agencies, all the military, the CIA, the NSA, and all the rest of them. And they play the reels of Zapruder film, not the Zapruder film that we've all seen, but the actual one. And they turn up the lights and they turn to him and say, "Any questions?"
Yeah.
So, right, I mean, so that, I'm sure that's not actually true, but certainly it's true in effect. So does Trump really want to do all this stuff? Is he being threatened? Was he a liar from the beginning? It's tough to know, but he certainly has disappointed his supporters. And this budget business, I mean, he's outdone any other president in his budget deficits, and it looks like with this new budget, it's going to be massively increased even over his previous ones. So it's more than disappointing, it's outrageous. On the other hand, I guess a lot of people will end up voting for him as versus a socialist.
Mm-hmm. So let's pull away from the Republicans for a moment to move to the potential Democrats for 2020. Now, the last list that I saw had 16, and I actually think that my list was abbreviated. I think it's actually closer to 18 if you count Bernie Sanders as a Democrat as opposed to an independent. Mm-hmm. But we'll, just for the sake of brevity, we'll say 16 because otherwise we'll be here all night. I don't want to talk about all these jokers individually, but from a wide view, before we get into the nit and gritty, how many of those 16 do you see as candidates that really have any genuine shot at the Democratic nomination?
Well, I think probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
I think Bernie Sanders is no question he's ahead.
Okay.
And some of the polls show Biden ahead, but I think that once Biden is actually running, mm-hmm. That will be no longer the case. So I'm afraid that Bernie is probably going to be the person, although probably the actual person who ought to be the candidate in the view of a lot of her supporters is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's too young to be the candidate, but she is in effect the candidate because they're all adopting her policies, whether it's mm-hmm. the Green New Deal or the other horrible things that she's proposing.
Now, I want to back up a second because you're correct that Biden is still on the, according to the New York Times, he's likely to run, but hasn't officially announced. Now, are you trying to tell me that announcing his candidacy is the worst thing he can do for his poll numbers?
Well, of course, nobody's targeting him now because he's not a candidate.
Sure.
Once he's a candidate, there's a lot of stuff in his background, I think, that will bother the Democrats, and they're going to attack him. And of course, it's funny that all these people who are oriented towards young candidates, allegedly, their top people are all elderly, same as in, of course, the leadership in the House of Representatives and also in the Senate. So I think that Biden, yes, will end up like Elizabeth Warren, not for exactly the same issues, but he's going to end up being a lot less popular than he seems to be now once he's actually the candidate and they all have their sights on him.
Now, I've heard people make the jokes in the past that you don't really have to go that far into history to see political figures that would no longer fit with their party in modern day. Like a mid-90s Bill Clinton would be nowhere near left enough for the modern Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Another broad question before we get into some of the specific candidates. It seems to me on the surface that in general a lot of the Democratic hopefuls are just racing to see who can be the furthest left. But our civics and political 101 courses in school tell you that it's the candidates that can get the biggest chunk of the middle are the ones who win the election. So what am I missing there? It seems like a counterintuitive strategy to be racing to see who's the most radical leftist, but on the surface it seems like that's what so many of them are doing. So what am I missing?
Well, I think you're right, and I think probably there's no past president who would pass muster, including Obama. I must say I liked it when Ilhan Omar criticized him as just a pretty face who engaged in a policy of murder overseas. And of course that's true. His drone policy killed many thousands of innocents, and lots of other people they consider non-innocents in Afghanistan and many other countries. So I think that even Obama would have trouble if he were able to run again. It's very interesting, and it's probably, I guess it appeals to young people. There was a poll out just a couple of days ago that said that half of the American millennials would like to live under a socialist regime. Of course, none of them know what socialism is, but they nevertheless like the idea of it because it just, it sounds sweet, it sounds good, equality and all these other evil ideas.
Well, again, it seems so odd because my default position in something like that often is that if someone is doing something that's counterintuitive to me, but presumably they have years, if not decades, of experience in their field, and I'm certainly not an experienced Democratic hopeful for president, so I don't know anything, is that if they're racing to the left when historical evidence would seem to suggest that racing to the middle is what wins you the election. Is that their way of saying that they believe that the electorate is shifting to the left, and so that's why they're shifting to the left?
Well, remember, the nomination is a very different thing from the actual election.
True.
So it's true that they will run as a more so-called moderate candidate if they're running against Trump, whereas they would tend to be very left-wing to try to get the support of the billionaires who are left wing, as well as young people. And of course they're proposing that in Congress just the other day that 16-year-olds be allowed to vote. But why not have 12-year-olds or 8-year-olds or whatever? They want to, of course, increase the electorate, as Hans Hoppe has demonstrated. When you increase the electorate, it expands the state. And ever since the Americas had everybody voting, the state has done nothing but just expand at a tremendous rate, and they want to make it even worse. Also, they want to have illegal aliens being able to vote, and they want, I guess, anybody who can get into the country can vote. And of course, these people will be easy votes for the Democrats, because they come from countries that are socialist, and they'll have no sympathy for libertarians, as has been shown by a lot of polling work. They have no sympathy for our kinds of views. They're all statists, and they bring that with them, so they're going to dramatically increase the number of statists in the electorate. And I must say it's scary what's ahead. But at least we can have some fun with the election. I think these elections are always fun, and the so-called debates are always fun. And I guess they're talking about having, because there are going to be so many candidates, having two different Democratic debates chosen by lot each time. But I think that's not as interesting to have as everybody up there. So I guess we'll see. But I think there's fun times ahead. But who knows what happens after the election.
Well, let's get into a few of these specifically before we move on. So I'll ask you a few a few wide-angle ones. Are there any candidates among the current Democratic hopefuls that have any redeeming qualities whatsoever?
Well, I must say, and I never thought I would say this, but I think the only candidate who has got some redeeming qualities is the former president of Starbucks and founder of Starbucks. And he's actually got some, as compared to the Democrats, and he would have run as a Democrat, I think, in a normal, what he thinks of as a normal year. He would have no chance now because he's not a socialist, and in fact is very critical of socialism.
Yeah.
And so will he run as an independent? I don't know. I noticed that Mayor Bloomberg has decided he's not going to run, although he keeps threatening it each election cycle. But I think the Democrats who are actually running, no, I don't think there's anybody who's got, so far as I can tell, any redeeming features. I mean, it's sort of fun that Elizabeth Warren claimed to be an Indian for so long, and of course got her job by claiming to be an Indian, and just recently came out that when she joined the Texas bar, she's identified herself as an American Indian. So she didn't say, part, she just said an American Indian. And Harvard, when she was on their faculty, described her as the first professor of color on the Harvard Law faculty. She's a white woman. Nothing wrong with that, by the way, but obviously the Democrats think there's something wrong with that. So it's, I think, Warren is somebody who's got no chance whatsoever, even though she tries to be more left-wing than now. Just because I think the Indian thing has damaged her, and I thought so. As soon as I heard Trump refer to her as Pocahontas, I thought that's the end of her, and I think that's been pretty much the case.
Now, I've seen a lot in libertarian circles people talking about Tulsi Gabbard, and they mention her specifically. Not that she is particularly different in domestic or economic policy, but she does seem to be anti-war, which would set her apart from most, for sure, if not all, on both sides of the aisle at this point. Are you afraid? Not that she's nowhere remotely in the ballpark of a Ron Paul, but I feel like I already am beginning to see that she's becoming the next unperson by the mainstream media. That just because she disagrees with the party platform on that one thing, she's already magically not involved in the polling, and they don't show her name on TV when they're showing other candidates. Like, it's you and I would know that phenomenon very well, but it seems like it's already happening to her. But you look at Tulsi, she's from Hawaii, she's relatively young, she was in the military, she favors socialistic economic policies. You would think that checks a lot of the boxes, but because she's anti-war, she doesn't exist.
Well, they want to kill her, of course, that's true.
Yeah.
And she's very smart, I might add, too. She's very articulate, and she's a very effective spokeswoman. I'd like to believe that she means it. But you're right. I mean, everybody hates her guts, from the New York Times to the Washington Post to all the other candidates and all the Democratic websites. They all just can't stand her. So maybe there's something good about her from that. Maybe she means it.
That's what I hope. The way I'm looking at the election right now is that if the opposite of Tulsi Gabbard then would be Kamala Harris, which is another name that we don't say very often on this program for obvious reasons, because Kamala Harris checks several of the same boxes, but she's perfectly fine with the warfare state, and of course professionally she was a prosecutor in California and was more than happy to see the harshest sentences carried out to the what I would consider to be innocent, but the least fortunate people to receive those sentences. And so just for those reasons alone, they seem to be pretty diametrically opposed. And really, other than that, it really just seems like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. I really don't feel like any other Democratic candidates have put enough forward at this point that they're really in the conversation.
Well, people like Kristen Gillibrand are just, even though they think that by by being as left as possible and as being social justice warriors to the nth degree, that they're getting somewhere, but of course they're not. So I think that if Tulsi Gabbard means it, you know, I'd love to see her. I'd love to see her go up against Trump, and can she beat him? I don't know, but you're exactly right. They all hate her guts, which is an indication that maybe she means it. Certainly, they're afraid she means it. Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, the key issue in the Democratic Party as well as in the Republican Party: the warfare state, the empire, the worldwide empire of American. Troops stationed in more than 100 countries, and constant warfare that goes on, whether it's, you know, Obama or Clinton or anybody else, any of the other Democrats, Roosevelt, Truman, LBJ. I mean, the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, has a terrible record of killing people en masse. And of course, this is what the state does best, if that's the right word for it. They're able to massively kill millions of people. So I guess the Democrats would like to get back to that. And maybe Trump is not doing as much of that as they would like. I mean, he's not actually bombing people in Syria right now, so that's all to the good, even though he won't get the troops out. Of course, they are bombing people in Afghanistan, and have done so for so many years. So I was thrilled when he said we needed to get out of Afghanistan. He was going to hold peace talks with the Taliban. And you would need to hold peace talks with the Taliban to get their agreement not to harry U.S. troops as they're leaving, just to let them leave in peace. And no question, I guess the Taliban would be the government. Certainly they were a popular government when the U.S. went in to overthrow them for reasons entirely ridiculous. It was because allegedly they had given shelter to Osama bin Laden. Mm-hmm. And I remember when the U.S. said, so you got to turn him over or we're going to bomb you. And the head of the Taliban said, well, where's your evidence that he did this? And so the Republican Secretary of State said, we're going to present the dossier to the UN, not to you people, but to the UN showing his guilt. They never did produce such a dossier. So Taliban said, unless you can give us evidence as has been required under international law to extradite this man, we're not going to do it. And so the U.S., of course, replied with bombs and massive killing.
So let's, before we move on from the political talk, let's get out our crystal ball and try to do some prognosticating. Who do you think today, who wins the Democratic nomination?
I'm afraid it's Bernie Sanders. When we look at the reception he's getting in Iowa and New Hampshire, massive receptions that remind me a little bit of what happened to Ron Paul. If we had to say today, but of course, obviously things can change in a minute. There are things in Bernie's background too that might cause him trouble if really harped upon. So it's tough to say. But if I had to put my money on one guy today, I would say Bernie Sanders.
Do you feel pretty confident in saying that Trump wins a second term?
No.
Okay.
I think it's likely Trump wins a second term, but I don't think it's in the bag at all. And I guess he plans to talk about socialism. That's a powerful thing to denounce and to discuss. I think if it's Trump versus Bernie Sanders, I think Trump probably wins, but I'm not sure Trump wins. And also we have to know what's going to happen. Is he going to massacre people in Venezuela or other countries? Mm-hmm. It looks like they backed off somewhat. It looked like they thought that they were going to just pull the rabbit out of the hat and the Venezuelans would collapse and welcome the U.S. into run their oil industry, which of course, as Elliot Abrams has said, it's going to be a great thing for big business in the U.S. to take over Venezuela. Oh, well, I'm sure. Well, thanks very much for telling us that, Elliot, you warmongering creep. War criminal, of course, Elliot.
Sure. one last question about politicos that we can't stand, and we'll move on. Have we heard the last of Hillary Clinton?
Well, you know, it looked like just the other day she said, "I'm not going to run," and then a few days later she said, "Well, I might run." So I'd like to think we've heard the last of her. Of course, it would be the best thing for Trump to face her again.
Sure.
But I think the Democrats don't want her. And my guess is that she would be humiliated, and that would be fun if she decides to run.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I mean, leave it to having on Lew Rockwell on the show to talk about political theater. I know that is right in your wheelhouse, and I'd appreciate it too. But at this point, I tend to lean in the camp of the sooner that she no longer makes any public appearances, the sooner that the American consciousness that only goes about 15 minutes anyway can forget about her, and then we can all pretend that Hillary Clinton never happened.
No, it's great. Of course, I'd like to see her prosecuted as Trump promised, but of course that's another promise he hasn't kept.
Of course.
So
yeah.
So it's she's part of the establishment, a very significant part of the establishment, and they're protecting her. So I guess that's not going to happen. But it would be fun to see her go back to Chappaqua and shut up. And of course, she can take her husband with her too.
Definitely. So I want to spend the rest of the time that we have today. I had talked to some of the fans of the show and some of our friends, and I had said that you were going to be on the program, and we were talking about what are some good topics for us to discuss, or maybe things that we haven't heard you talk about on other programs often, or in the past, or recently. And the thing that came up most commonly was, I'd really like to hear Lew tell us a story or two from the early days of founding the Mises Institute, from working personally with people like Murray Rothbard. And the reason why I'd like to hear those stories is because, of course, I'm 33 years old. I turned 34 in September, and I was a libertarian-leaning individual before 2008. I was fortunate that I grew up in a Southern household that was a shoot the census man when he comes up the driveway type of folks. So I have that deeply embedded in my Tennessee blood. But with that said, I know that there's a lot of young people, a lot of people that were stirred to action during the Ron Paul years, or a lot of people that have only found libertarianism recently, that they know the names, and perhaps they've even read a book or two, but they really don't have a lot of conjecture as to what kind of men some of those great figures in our movement were. And I was wondering if maybe you could share a story or two to help give some people light into what type of people these individuals were when they were still with us.
Well, Murray Rothbard was an extraordinary man. Not only was he a genius, I would argue a world-class genius, but he was unlike other people I've met who were geniuses. He was very much down to earth. He was a humble guy, and he never paraded his intelligence and his vast knowledge in front of people, although if somebody asked him a question about something, he was happy to answer it. Mm-hmm. And I remember being in an academic used bookstore in New York with Murray, and picking up a book, and I said, Murray, do you know this book? Is this worth my buying? And of course, he'd read the book and knew everything about it. And so then I started playing a game with him, picking up books at random, and he knew every single book I picked up. So he did vast reading. And by the way, the next book project of the Mises Institute is the long-lost 5th volume of his Conceived in Liberty, his history of early America from the earliest days up through the Constitution. And the 5th book never got published. He had written it all out and done it in handwriting on yellow sheets. And we had that, but none of us were able to ever decipher it. And he had not ever completed the job because he had done it in handwriting because he had a friend who had given him his used dictating machine that recorded what you spoke on clear green discs, plastic discs. And so Murray recorded the whole book, 350 pages, and then when Joey was taking the dictating machine to transcribe it, they all turned out to be garbage. They all turned out to just be unintelligible. And so Murray was going to type out the whole thing at some point and he never did it. He had other projects that he was involved in.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe this 5th volume, which is about the adoption of the Constitution and why it was a terrible idea and why crooked means were used to adopt the Constitution, I had thought we were never going to see it. But Patrick Newman, a former student of ours, now a young professor, was able to read this manuscript with great difficulty, but he did it. So we have this book coming out. I must say it's a tremendous piece of work, so interesting, so revisionist, so brilliant, typical of Murray, just filled with facts that other historians either neglect or don't know about, and so beautifully written. And anybody who's not read Rothbard, I can't urge you more strongly to just pick up anything that he wrote. His book on his monograph on the anatomy of the state, for example, is a life-changing thing. They're so easy to read. He is so effective at taking complicated ideas and making them understandable. That this is another great book. And Patrick was the one who was responsible for bringing out Murray's last book, which was the progressive era. So there have been jokes around the Institute that Murray is far more, productive as a dead man than the other scholars are alive. But he was just tremendously fun, extremely funny. When he was in a room, everybody gathered around him to listen to him, and it wasn't more than 60 or 120 seconds before everybody is laughing out loud. I mean, he was like a stand-up comedian in addition to everything else about him. Extremely funny and extremely generous with anybody who wanted his time, young students, anybody asking him a question. He just couldn't be more generous, and so he's funny, humble, generous, unbelievably knowledgeable, and just a tremendous guide. I remember Bob Higgs when he did his one of his great books. He asked Murray to take a look at the manuscript, and he said Murray sent him back about 30 typed pages of things to think about, people to read, and Bob said he took a year to redo the book and to take account of all that Murray had told, and he knew more than Bob Higgs did about Bob Higgs' subject. Yuri Maltsev, who was a Russian economist and came to the United States and an associate of the Mises Institute, talked about getting a letter from Murray asking him, was he interested in these free market Russian economists from various stages of Russian history, none of which Yuri had ever heard of. And he'd gotten a PhD, and he had access to all the secret sort of the non-public divisions of the Soviet library system, and so so they allowed him to read Keynes, was a big deal. But he said Murray knew far more about Russian economics than he did, and this is just true across the board. The amount of he just was so brilliant, but so non-intimidating. Such a great teacher, and he loved teaching. And I've had former students of his at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, say that he would start teaching the moment he came into the room. That he would start talking to the students as soon as he entered the door, and that you had a number of these kids who audited his courses once and twice again because everything was entirely different. He didn't. He did one course on American business history. They said the second and the third time they took it, for not credit for the second and third time, every single thing was different. This was the kind of teacher he was. He was just unbelievably eloquent, fascinating, fun, and he spent endless hours in his office with students who wanted to meet with him. Just an amazing guy, and of course, what a help to the Mises Institute. I've told this story before. When I asked him if he would be our academic vice president, and told him I was planning to start a Mises Institute. I've never seen anybody do this. He actually leapt in the air a little bit and clapped his hands. Joy. He was so happy because he loved Mises so much as a man as well as an economist. And I had the same view of Mises, and in fact that's why I wanted to start the institute, because I thought that his reputation and the value of his work was becoming lost, that people weren't paying attention to him, and that I thought he deserved that for the hero he was, as well as, of course, for being the great economist he was.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an awesome account, and as you were talking, a guy that came into my mind was Harry Browne, and the reason that name entered my mind is because I was just thinking how important it is, but also how it's really a talent. It's really an ability unto itself to be able to absorb knowledge, to be able to translate it to the layman so that they can understand and they can really follow along, but also to do it in the type of personal way that it's not a sermon, it's not a talking down to, it's a conversation, but it's a fruitful conversation with information. And Harry Browne was such an amazing actor at being able to do such a thing. And so
he was a star.
Yeah, the whole time you were telling me, I was like, I can see where Harry Browne gets it from then. Like I can just imagine in my mind absorbing that information and then saying, okay, how can I translate this to a room full of people that maybe have never heard this once in their lives, and whether they think it's crazy or whether I leave them wanting more, I hope at the very least I can do it in such a way that they want to listen. And that seems to be a lost art.
I had the honor to be the editor of Harry's first book, How You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation. And it had been turned down by every other single publisher in the country that he could find. But I must say, the minute I started reading it, and the first chapter is just an extraordinary distillation of Austrian monetary economics for the layman, just tremendously eloquent. And of course, Harry, such a great speaker, such a great teacher, and any of us who knew him, that was a great honor.
If you could give us one more story, tell me a little something about Harry Browne, maybe a little anecdote to testify to his presence in a room, his ability to speak with people with, I'm not sure what the words I'm looking for here. He spoke very matter-of-factly, if that made sense. It wasn't this is what I think. It wasn't well, if I had my way. It was this is how things are. This is how economics works. This is how policy works. And this is how we can make the world better. Like I said, it's really a skill to be able to speak confidently and matter-of-factly, but not pompously. It's hard to do for some people.
Harry was unbelievable, and I'll never forget that he was on a talk show after his book was published by Arlington House Publishers in New York. And so, of course, I listened to it, and he did just the most interesting radio presentation I've ever heard on economics, and also talking about why he felt that there was a coming devaluation, which he was entirely right about. But what really got everybody's attention at our publishing company was the next day, we got so many calls from bookstores wanting his book that we actually ran out of the first printing in one day, and had to go back and reprint it. He had the ability to get. He was just a great salesman of his own book, as well as of the ideas contained in it. And he in that book also recommended what was then called the Pacific Coast Coin Exchange if you wanted to buy bags of silver. And I had the man who was the head of the company tell me that Harry's mentioning of their company in his book made their company. I mean, that it brought so much attention to them and so many sales that he was forever grateful to Harry Browne. And Harry had that. I don't want to call it salesmanship, because that sort of is not quite it. It was again, he had tremendous knowledge. He was just, as you say, matter of fact. He was just as good if you were having lunch with him. at teaching you something as he was in a room. He was a star, and all of us who knew him, I know, miss him. And we've not had anybody like that in the Libertarian Party, with the exception, of course, of Ron Paul. We have, and of course, then we've had some non-libertarians running for president in the Libertarian Party too.
We could do an entirely different episode based just upon that, just upon the topic of where is the next Harry Browne, because I certainly don't see him. I don't know. I certainly don't see him in the party. We've been pretty anti-libertarian party on this program, so I better stop there before I get myself into any more trouble.
Good for you.
Yes.
And I don't mean stopping.
Well, Lou, thank you so much for being on the program. It would be horrible for me to end this segment if we didn't mention really quickly Mises.org, where everybody can go to learn about the Mises Institute, where there's such a wealth of information, of articles, of resources that are made available totally for free to people. I see people comment on the internet all the time. I say, people saying, I've heard about this book, I've heard about that book, this article, that author, or I heard about it on a program, I want to listen to it, or I want to read it. And to be able to tell people, well, you don't even have to search Amazon or Google or Audible. You can go to the Mises Institute and you can do that for free. It's such a profound impact. But I also want to mention to people LewRockwell.com. And the Political Theater blog especially, which is fantastic. And I also want to thank you as well, because I just actually, not even a few months ago, did I start writing articles to help support the show and to get the message out there. And a good friend of ours, Mike Meharry of the 10th Amendment Center, he had said that the holy trinity of getting your articles published in the libertarian community are Fee, Mises, and Lew Rockwell. And I had Fee publish some articles, and I had Mises publish some articles. And thankfully, the most recent one that I did, that was revisiting the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was on LewRockwell.com. And so now I've done it. Now I've finished the holy trinity of publishing articles, so I can retire now happily.
You're going to send me more, Alan.
Well, we're certainly going to try. So are there any other links or tidbits that you want to add before we go?
No, just that I got to know Mises a little bit, not like I knew Murray Rothbard, who I had talked to on the phone every day for years. But when I worked for Arlington, that was the company that also published Harry Browne's book. When the president, great man Neil McCaffrey, called me into his office, he said, "How'd you like to be Ludwig von Mises' editor?" So
how does one answer such a question?
I was in my early 20s. Well, obviously, I thought it was unbelievable. So this was to bring back 3 of his books into print and to publish a newly written monograph. So I got to know Mises a little bit. I got to know his wife, Margaret, better, and I had dinner with them once. And as Murray said about Mises, he came from an older and a better civilization of pre-war Vienna. Just a great gentleman, beautifully dressed, beautiful manners. And even though this was when I had dinner with him and Margaret, it was towards the end of his life. Still, he was extraordinary, and so I've always treasured that memory of being able to know him and talk to him on the phone as well. And so when I started the institute, or I decided to start the institute, the first person whose okay I got was Margaret von Mises, and she was very, very generous to give that to me and served as our first chairman of the board until her death. She was a great guide, a great, Murray referred to her after her death as a one-woman Mises industry. I mean, she'd been dedicated to making sure all his books were in print and everything was translated into as many languages as possible. And she did tremendous work. And so I've been always very grateful to her for serving as our chairman, and of course to Mises himself for being the reason for the Institute.
Well, speaking of that, since you brought that up, I did have a couple more questions really quick. One
Sure.
being, if gentlemen like Mises, if Rothbard, if Harry Browne were still with us today, what sort of interaction or impact do you think they would have on social media? Like, can you imagine a Harry Browne or a Murray Rothbard on Twitter?
Well, I remember thinking when W. Bush started the Iraq War, I remember thinking if Murray were alive, he would be overnight the key anti-war voice in the entire world in the English language.
Sure.
He was that effective and that productive. Mm-hmm. I think Mises too, who was an extraordinary teacher, as well as and also very generous with students, and I think they would have a tremendous impact. On the other hand, men like Mises and Rothbard, these world-class geniuses, only come along pretty seldom in history. And how lucky those of us who are libertarians, who are Austrian economists, are to have had these two great geniuses, one right after the other. I mean, it's something very unusual. Harry Browne was very unusual too, and we lost him far too soon. He was a very great man.
LewRockwell.com, Mises.org. Lew, thank you so very much for being on the program today. It's such an honor to have you on the show.
Alan, great to be with you, and send me more articles.
I definitely do have one ready. I'm going to send you another one.
Okay,
but we're
tremendous.
We'll get you out on this question. It's the same question I've asked basically every guest we've had on the show to end the program. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
It's not? Oh, unbelievable. We are very pro hot dog sandwich on this show. I can't believe it. I'm being rebuked by Lew Rockwell on the program.
No, I mean, I like having a hot dog and a roll and a bun.
Yeah.
They said when I was a kid, that was a favorite of mine.
Well, okay. So because you enjoy hot dogs, but you're adamantly that it is not classified as a sandwich.
Well, we can have many schools of thought in this area as well as others.
Well, I think that's a good politically correct answer to end the show on. Lew, thank you so much. Guys, we will be right back after this break.
Have you ever been talking politics with a friend and told, if you don't like it here, you should just move to Somalia?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the sandy beaches of Mogadishu, Sherry and I bring you Postcards from Somalia, one of the newer products of Little L Productions, where we take on all of the fallacies of the people who say, if you don't like it, you can just get out.
Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com. Guys, welcome back to the show for the final segment. And I just, I'm the type of host. I like to instead of like mealy mouthing around things, I like to just point them out. We've reached a new low of professionalism on the production end of this program. That people with ripped jeans are on the show. Look at that.
Hey,
look at that. I would say, hey, can we zoom in on that? But the producer's over here now instead of over there, so we can't do it.
It's a fashion statement. What can I say? I used to be a rocker guy. I don't know. Or I just need a new pair of jeans.
Okay. Yeah, all right. I don't have to explain yourself.
It's always on the right knee. I can never figure out why. I guess it's because I always kneel down on the right knee. I spend a lot of time on the floor hooking things up.
Spend a lot of time on your knees, do you?
Not to you.
There's actually, I actually had a quote pulled up that I was going to mention when we had Lew on, and I totally forgot it because it was so good. It actually was just yesterday from the Mises Institute Twitter at Mises. Yeah. It's a quote by H.L. Mencken. It's the urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule it. And like that, boy, does that not sum up the presidential hopefuls right there? Yeah. They're all. Like, everyone's platform is, the world's coming to an end, and so this is how we're going to fix it. And that quote, like, nails it home so well.
It really does. It really does.
And I really can't stress enough, and we mentioned this on the show, I can't stress this enough. If you're a young libertarian out there, or you're just new to the school of thought and you're wanting to learn more, there's just no excuse. You go to Mises.org, and there's such a massive amount of resources available to you. So many articles, so many books, so many things in audio format as well, if that's your cup of tea. That's all made available for free there. It's an incredible nonprofit, and as it being a nonprofit, if you're the type of person that likes to do a little charitable giving, Mises.org is such a great place to do that. So after you've gone to thegoldstandardpodcast.com, click donate, typed in 999-999-999-999, enter. Then whatever you have left, which I'm sure is a ton, because you guys are rich, just loaded. Our fans are just loaded.
After all, you're sitting here and you've got time to watch us. So.
Yeah, exactly. When you're done with that, you go to Mises.org and donate to them. It's a nonprofit. It's for a great cause. It's very, very real and demonstrable ways that they're helping to spread the ideas of liberty. What'd you think about Lew, by the way?
Gosh. That guy was fortunate to meet some of the most incredible people in the libertarian movement, inventors of the logic behind libertarianism. It's incredible. You know, it's incredible to get to meet people like that on this show. I mean, and you did an awesome job. And I mean, he's mind blowing. I know
that we've been trying to trim the run time, and we've done a pretty good job of trimming the show down more to like 40-45 minutes. But but this one was going to run long. But we have a good excuse because it's such a rare treat to get to have somebody like Lew Rockwell on the show. But not only that, I wanted to give him some time. We had discussed this before the program. I know this is shocking to some listeners, but believe it or not, we do plan a few things in advance.
We try.
Most things we don't, but some things we do. And one of them is I wanted to give Lew a chance to tell us some stories of folks that you've read their names, you've seen their books, you know their names, you hear people cite them all the time. You hear a Tom Woods say all the time, well, one of my biggest inspirations is Murray Rothbard. And so to be able to hear anecdotes from somebody who was there on the ground with these gentlemen when they were in the prime of their intellectual careers is very rare. It's very humbling. But I definitely think that sometimes something that can get lost in a message is the character and the character of the people who put it together. And that's not to say that a horrible human being can't write an economic treatise or whatever. But we're actually really spoiled because actually they were fantastic human beings. They were fantastic people, incredibly inspirational, not just intellectually, but personally.
And then the way he talked about Murray Rothbard just brought him to life, you know.
And Harry Browne. Like, you know, I mean, every guest who's come on the show where we talked about Harry Browne at all, I think everyone's opinion is exactly the same, both of him as a man and of the fact that, man, where is Harry Browne today? Like, I mean, I know where he is today. He's no longer with us. But the next Harry Browne just never came. Like these bozos, like if you think Bill Well deserves to even eat the grass that Harry Browne is walking over, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're definitely don't know anything about libertarianism. It's such a shame, but at least we have folks like Lew Rockwell with us who can remind us of the character and the impact of some of those folks. Unbelievable. So really, you shouldn't even be watching this end of the show. You should just go back and watch the interview and then
watch it again.
And that's
he said so much.
But guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so. It's facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter is @Alan and Mosley, but you don't have to do any of that. You can just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com. We will see you next week.